Alright folks, what I wanted to do was just make a quick little video on factoring. Factoring is super important in college algebra, and I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay. So for instance, let's say we have the following equation. Let's say it's 8x squared minus 16x equals 0. Sorry about that. Alright, so the first thing that you look for whenever you factor is something called the greatest common factor. Okay, so as we look at this, we ask ourselves, is there anything in common between an 8x squared and a negative 16x? Well, yes, certainly there's something in common. In fact, we can factor out an 8x. If we factor out an 8x, what's remaining? Well, factoring is nothing more than division. 8x squared divided by 8x leaves us with a 1x. Negative 16x divided by 8x leaves us with a negative 2. We're going to set that equal to 0. Okay? Alright, so what do we do next? Now we take each one of those factors, the 8x and the x minus 2, we set those equal to 0. Okay? Where does this come from? This comes from something called the zero product property. Okay? It means if you multiply two things and they equal 0, that means that at least one of them has to be 0. So 8x equals 0. We're going to compare that to x minus 2 equals 0. Alright, let's do a different color. To solve for x on this first equation, I divide both sides by 8, which gives us the equation, or the solution. X is equal to 0 divided by 8 is 0. Alright, x minus 2 equals 0. We add 2 to both sides, and we get the solution. X is equal to 2. Alrighty. That is our solution for that problem. Okay, let's try a few more factoring. For example, suppose we have the following. Suppose it's 4x minus 5x squared is equal to 0. Alright? Same deal here. Anytime you factor a quadratic, you want to see if there's something in common you can factor out. Well, in this case, we can factor out an x. What's remaining when we factor out that x? Yep, it's going to be 4 minus 5x, and we set that equal to 0. Alright, as we did before, we're going to set both of those factors equal to 0, because x times 4 minus 5x will equal 0 when either x equals 0 or 4 minus 5x equals 0. Okay? Well, we've already got one solution, x equals 0. To get our second solution, we have to solve for x. Well, how do we do that? Well, we're going to add 5x to both sides. So 4 is equal to 0 plus 5x. So let me see here. What we did to both sides, we added 5x. And then our next step is to divide both sides by 5. And that's where we get the solution. X is equal to 4/5. Okay? Alright, so that's what happens whenever you have something in common you can factor out. Always check to see if you have something in common first. Okay? Well, how about something like this? For example, suppose we're asked to solve this. X squared minus 5x minus 6 is equal to 0. Alright, so this is the problem where because we have a 1x squared, or a is equal to 1, we can go ahead and jump straight to constructing a set of parentheses. And set that equal to 0. Because it's a 1x squared, we're going to put a 1x in both of these parentheses. And the question now becomes, what do we now put in for the rest of the parentheses? Well, this is what you do. You're going to ask yourself, look, I'm looking for a set of numbers that multiplies to negative 6. Okay? Looking for a set of numbers that multiplies to negative 6. But those same set of numbers, when I multiply to get negative 6, I have to sum and have to add them together and get a positive 5. Okay? So let's see if we can figure that out. What set of numbers, what two numbers multiply to negative 6, but they add to give us a negative 5? Okay, some people may be thinking 3 and 2, but that's not going to work out. What about 6 and 1? And that's correct, okay? But they have to multiply to give me a negative 6 and sum to a negative 5. So that means that the correct factorization is x minus 6 times x plus 1. A negative 6 times a positive 1 is a negative 6. A negative 6 plus 1 is a negative 5, okay? Make sure you're very careful with your signs. And so now if we set both of those factors equal to 0, we get the following equations. X minus 6 equals 0. X plus 1 equals 0. Okay? Solving both of these, hopefully everybody's in agreement, we get x equals 6 and x equals a negative 1. Alright? Hopefully that wasn't too much there. How about this one? So this is just factoring boot camp. For example, let's say we have x squared minus 8x is equal to a negative 12. Okay? So whenever factoring a quadratic, and that's what this video is exclusively for, factoring quadratics, the first thing you have to do is get this thing in standard form. What do I mean by that? I'm looking for, actually we could write it over here. What's standard form for a quadratic? Standard form is, I'm talking about ax squared plus bx plus c, and we're going to set that equal to 0 for these equations. Okay. Well, to do that for this equation here, we're going to move that negative 12 to the other side. We're going to achieve that by adding 12 to both sides, which gives us x squared minus 8x plus 12 is equal to 0. We are now in standard form. And so now we factor. Let's factor. Let's see here. We got an x in that parentheses. We have an x in this parentheses. Once again, keep in mind what you're asking yourself. For this, you're saying, look, I need a set of numbers that multiplies to 12. But when we add those same numbers, we got to get back a negative 8. Okay? Well, let's think about that. A set of numbers that multiplies to 12, but they sum to give us a negative 8. Let's see. So think about some ways we can multiply to get 12. 4 and 3 gives us 12, but there's no way we can sum that to get 8. 2 and 6, that multiplies to 12. So if we do a negative 2 times a negative 6, that should be it, right? Negative 2 times negative 6 is a positive 12. If we add those two together, negative 2 plus a negative 6, that's going to give us a negative 8. There we go. So this becomes x minus 2 times x minus 6 equals 0. We set both of those equal to 0. And we're in there. X equals 2, x equals 6. All right, one more of these and we'll get a little more difficult. How about something like this? For example, suppose we had x plus 1 times x plus 3, x minus 3 is equal to, let's say, 5. All right, and once again, we have to solve this via factoring. So you may ask yourself, you may say, hey, this thing is already factored. The left side is, but remember, our job is to get it in standard form. We have to move everything to one side and set it equal to 0. Okay? Well, the first thing I want to do is let's FOIL out that left-hand side. Okay? What I mean by that is we're going to take x times x, which gives us x squared. Let's get rid of that equal sign. What else we got? X times a negative 3. That's going to give us a negative 3x. And then we distribute our 1, right? 1 times x, that gives us a plus 1x. And then 1 times a negative 3 is going to give us a negative 3. And then remember, this equals 5. Now on my left side, I'm going to combine my like terms. So let's see, x squared, and then we have a negative 3x plus 1x. So that means we have a negative 2x. And then minus 3, that equals 5. And then we subtract the 5 over. Remember, to get in standard form, move everything to one side, set it equal to 0. Okay, subtract 5, subtract 5. Let's do a different color here. So we're going to have x squared minus 2x. Negative 3 minus 5 is a negative 8, is equal to 0. Okay? And now we look at that and we say, okay, let's factor it. Let's factor it. So what does that factor into? Let's see here. 1x squared, so we can go ahead and put our x's in here. Once again, we're looking for a set of numbers that multiplies to a negative 8, but then they sum and give us a negative 2. So think about the ways that we can multiply to get 8. 1 and 8, there's no way to get that into a negative 2. But what about 4 and 2? Certainly 4 times 2 would give us to an 8, but we got to get the right combination of pluses and minuses. This is going to be x minus 4 times x plus 2. Okay, and just a little hint, if you're confused about what should be negative or positive, your negative right here, the sign of your B term, so to speak, is that tells you the sign of your largest number. Okay, we set both of those equal to 0. I'm going to go ahead and skip that step, and hopefully you guys agree. We get x is equal to 4, and x is equal to a negative 2. Remember, we set them equal to 0, move them over. That's what we get. All right. Like I said, folks, factoring boot camp. We got this. What if we have this equation? 2x squared. Let's see. Let's do plus 2x minus 40. Let's set that equal to 0. Okay? So I want to be extra clear. The first thing you do, well, the very first thing you do is you get it in standard form. We're in standard form. The first thing you always look for is you look for a greatest common factor. I haven't said in the last few problems, but look for a greatest common factor. Is there something in common between a 2x squared, a 2x, and a negative 40? Yeah. We have what in common? We got a 2 we can factor out. So let's do exactly that. If we factor out a 2, what's remaining? Let's see here. X squared, so 2x squared divided by 2 is an x squared, plus 2x divided by 2 is a plus 1x, and then a negative 40 divided by 2 leaves us with a negative 20. That equals 0. Okay. And so now, remember what we do is we set both our factors equal to 0. But with this one, it's a little different. Look at this one. With this one, will 2 ever equal to 0? It won't. So really, we don't even have to worry about the 2 there. So you may be saying before, Professor Dixon, when we factored out something last time, we set it equal to 0. Well, let me go back and see if I can find that. Something like the first example we did. Whenever we factor out that 8x, because 8x can equal 0, right, whenever x is 0, that's why we set that part equal to 0. But for our particular example, 2 can never equal 0. So we don't worry about the 2. What we're worried about now is the x squared plus x minus 20. Okay, so let's focus on just that. That's the only way that this equation can become 0. Okay, once again, that is because 2 can never equal 0. So we don't even worry about that. So imagine dividing through by 2. All right, and what happens now is that, hey, we can factor this. We need a set of numbers that multiplies to a negative 20, but sums to a positive 1. Well, what does that? Let's see here. 4 times 5. That gives us 20, but let's get the right combination of pluses and minuses. Remember what I told you, the b, the positive means that the larger number has the plus sign with it. Plus 5x minus 4. Once again, set both of those factors equal to 0. You get x is a negative 5 and x is a positive 4. Okay? All right. Lastly, I want to do a few more where we don't have a 1x squared, okay? For this, we're going to use something called AC grouping. Now, let me say this. There's other methods out there. If you're comfortable with other methods, and as long as you get the correct answer, I have no problems with that. But I just want to illustrate AC grouping method, which is just a systematic way of getting this thing correct, okay? I don't know. For example, suppose we have the following. Suppose we have 9x squared plus 12x minus 5 is equal to 0. Okay? So, here we have a 9x squared, so we just can't jump straight to our parentheses and put a x squared and x squared, because when we fold that back out, we're not going to get a 9x squared. So what we're going to do is called the AC grouping method. For AC grouping method, this is what you say. This is what you do. You're looking for a set of numbers that multiplies to give you what A times C is. Remember our standard form, right? That's A, B is 12, and C is a negative 5. So A times C is going to give us a 9 times a negative 5. Be extra careful with your signs there. A negative 45. And then the same two numbers have to sum to give us a positive 12. That's the middle term. Okay? If you're saying to yourself, hey, we've already kind of been doing that, you're exactly right. AC grouping is the more general method, and what we've been doing whenever we have a 1x squared is we've just been doing a little shortcut of AC grouping. Okay? All right, so now we have to figure out what are those numbers, those values. So let's see here. What multiplies a negative 45, what sums to 12? Well, I'm going to get straight to it. 15 times 3 gives you 45. But I need that to be a negative 45, and I need those to add to a positive 12. So therefore, what if we took a positive 15 and a negative 3? 15 plus a negative 3 is 12. 15 times a negative 3 is certainly a negative 45. So here we go. So that's the AC part. So now let's rewrite this. This becomes 9x squared. And what we're going to do, folks, is we're going to break up this 12x. We're going to break it up as the sum of 15x plus a negative 3x. Okay? So let's do that. So it's going to be plus 15x minus 3x. And then don't forget don't forget about the rest of our problem. Minus 5 equals 0. Okay? Hey, remember, we can't change the structure of this problem. We can't change what the problem is. Convince yourself, 15x minus 3x is certainly the same thing as a positive 12x. So we haven't changed the problem. We just wrote it in a slightly different fashion, which is all right. Okay? So here we go. That's the AC part. Here's the grouping part. You look at your first two terms, just the first two. And you say, okay, what do I have in common between a 9x squared and a 15x? We have a 3x in common. When you factor out a 3x, what does that leave you with? Out of just the first two terms. That leaves you with a 3x plus 15x divided by 3x is just 5. Now you look at the second group. Okay, do you see how the two groups are separated by that subtraction sign there? So what that's telling us, what that's implying is that we have to factor out something negative. Okay, so subtract away what? Let's see, 3x and a negative 5, minus 5. Is there anything in common between a 3x and a 5? No. So what does that mean? Factor out a 1. Okay? But it's not really a 1 we're factoring out, we're actually factoring out a negative 1. If we factor out a negative 1 from a negative 3x and a negative 5, what does that leave us with? So negative 3x divided by negative 1 is a positive 3x. Negative 5 divided by negative 1 is a positive 5. And we set that equal to 0. And we are almost there. Here we go. So 3x times 3x plus 5, that's one term. The 1 times 3x plus 5, that's another term. So now think about what happens. We have something in common between those two terms that I just said. What do we have in common? We got a 3x plus 5 in both of those terms. Factor out the 3x plus 5. And then what happens? If we factor out a 3x plus 5, what are we left with? What are we left with? We are left with, just imagine, cover up the 3x plus 5s. Do that for me. I can't do it on the video, but cover up the 3x plus 5s. What's remaining? What's remaining is a 3x minus 1. And now we set both of these factors equal to 0. Okay. 3x plus 5 equals 0. 3x minus 1 equals 0. Let's see, 3x equals a negative 5. If I subtract 5, x is equal to a negative 5/3. The other solution, we add 1 to the other side, but 3x equals to a positive 1. Divide through by 3, x is equal to a positive 1/3. Okay? Folks, this is the AC grouping, okay? AC grouping. Alright, I might do a couple more of these and I'll wrap this video up, and I don't want to make it too long. Another example. If we have this x times 2x minus 3 is equal to a negative 1. Alright, we are not in standard form. Not at all. Well, let's get this thing in standard form. First way we're going to do that is we're going to distribute the x on the left-hand side. That leaves us with a 2x squared minus 3x is equal to a negative 1. Then what do we do? To get it in standard form, we have to move the negative 1 over to the other side. How do we do that? We do that by adding 1. So 2x squared minus 3x plus 1 is equal to 0. And now we're in standard form. And now I'm going to do AC grouping once again. I need a set of numbers to multiply that gives me whatever A times C is. Convince yourself, A is 2 and C is 1. 2 times 1 gives you 2. But we need those same two numbers to sum to give us what? A negative 3. What set of numbers works for that? If you said negative 2, negative 1, you are correct. Negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 2. Negative 2 plus a negative 1 is certainly a negative 3. All right. So now what we're going to do, we're going to break up, once again, we're going to break up the negative 3x, the middle term, as, this time, a negative 2x plus a negative 1x. So let's see. This becomes 2x squared minus 2x minus 1x, okay, plus 1 equals 0. Okay? All right, I'm going to erase that 1, right? Because remember, negative x is just the same thing as implied negative 1x. Anyways, now we do our AC grouping. Look at the first two, folks. We say what's in common between a 2x squared and a 2x. You can factor out a 2x. What does that leave us with? 2x squared divided by 2x is an x. Minus 2x divided by 2x is a 1. 2x divided by 2x is 1, not 0. Okay? All right. Next group is x plus 1, but they're separated by what? They're separated by a minus, which means go ahead and bring down that minus. We got to factor out something negative. A negative what? In this case, there's nothing in common between x and 1, so we're going to factor out just a 1, and that leaves us with an x, right? A negative x divided by negative 1 is a positive x. A positive 1 divided by negative 1 is a negative 1. That equals 0. And we're almost there. We're going to factor out x minus 1. What's left over? Cover up the x minus 1s. What's left over is your 2x minus 1. I'm going to set those equal to 0. All right, set both of those equal to 0, and we are almost done. Okay. Add 1 to both sides of the first equation, we get x equals 1. That's one solution. Let's see, we add 1 to both sides for this one, we get 2x is equal to 1. Divide through by 2, and we get the second solution. X is equal to a positive 1/2. Okay. Hey, remember, folks, you can always go back and check yourself. Go back and check yourself and make sure this thing is correct. Okay. If I plug in 1 into my the first set of parentheses here, 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 times anything is 0. If I plug in 1/2 for x into the second set of parentheses, 2 times a half is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 times anything is 0. All right, so this is just longer than I anticipated, but this is just a little video to kind of get you familiar with factoring. Factoring will be extremely important going forward, so please, if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Hope this helps y'all. See you guys in class.